Morning all, or rather afternoon now. Let's have a look at Mattison Nimzovich from the Carlsbad 1929 tournament. I think this had lots of elements from Nimzovich's My System. Mattison finished halfway in the tournament cross table, which you can see from the previous video. And he was really strategically crushed here, I would say. By that I mean, White didn't really have much counterplay. The imbalances, which Silman would now refer to, were all in Black's favour. To such an extent, White was basically paralysed and just facing material loss in this game. So how did this disaster happen? And let's take Black's side, Nimzo's side. So his opponent played d4, and Nimzovich plays his own opening system that he invented, the Nimzo-Indian defence. The prelude to this is knight f6, a very flexible, hypermodern move in itself. None of this classical stuff by playing d5 or anything. The centre is invited for White to occupy, to later destroy somehow. So c4, again, no challenge in the centre directly, just the humble little move e6, but ready to launch the bishop into a positional sacrifice, because bishops were generally thought to be stronger than knights, but then later this view changed, and really it all depends on the position. But here, what are the imbalances that Black wants to create in the Nimzo-Indian defence? This pinning move, which a lot of GMs are now avoiding because they're not playing knight c3, they're playing knight f3 instead. Why is it so strong? Well, Nimzovich termed the pin as both a tactical and a strategic motive. He put the pin into two categories. It is a form of restraint, and obviously as a basis for combination sometimes, the pin is an essential element. But as a strategical element, why would Nimzovich call it a form of restraint? Well, White's knight is restrained in the short term, but it can also lead to structural damage once the pin is actually executed and leaving White with doubled pawns. But this whole restrain, blockade, destroy concept isn't, could you argue that this is just common sense? Because in real life, in military life, the blockade was an already existing military term, and it's commonly used like to cut off supplies to a key strategic point. So restrain, blockade, destroy is also, if you're going hunting, it's better if something's a fixed target or paralysed for a moment to attack it, because then there's less uncertainty. When you go for an attack against a fixed object, then it's more likely to succeed. You're dealing with less assumptions, less variables. So restrain, blockade, destroy is an obvious kind of common sense thing from both the point of view of military strategy, but also hunting. Okay, so knight f3, and Nimzovich, he doesn't wait for the move a3. He doubles White's pawns. Okay, but this is like a positional sacrifice. It really depends on the position. If White can liberate these two bishops, so it really does depend on the position. If White can use these two bishops, or if Black's knights are going to be really menacing monsters. Now this game is actually a vivid example, which I've covered before, but not from the perspective of the evolution of style. But how can these knights become menacing monsters from this position? Well, I think it's not just restraint, and blockade which is employed in this game. There's also overprotection, and I said that the key overprotection square is usually e5 or e4. If you're looking from Black's perspective, it's e4, and the Nimzo is kind of designed for e4 overprotection as well. But here first there's the move d6. So d6 not only starts the restraint against the double pawn complex, so this is the fixed target, and in particular c4 is going to be targeted in this game, but also it can be used for a later overprotection strategy. For this point, if these pieces were arranged like this, e5, you could get a lot of Black pieces aiming for e5, e4. Okay, White plays queen c2, which gives the impression that White might want to play e4. So Black needs to be prepared to answer e4 with e5. So his next move not only is again putting extra restraint on that c5 against this double pawn complex, but also e4 can be met now with e5. And it's important to keep these bishops under lock and key as well. If the bishop pair gets unleashed, this whole imbalance concept is not going to be very effective. Now White's a bit clumsy with his bishops here. This next bishop move's a bit awkward, and maybe he just didn't estimate properly that he's going to have such severe trouble with the c4 square soon. White's next move was bishop a3, And really the bishop's going to be hemmed in by black's pawn structure here. If black can set up a successful blockade on c5, and if white never has the liberating c5, he's going to be saddled with these double pawns, which might maybe in an endgame are going to be in a critical weakness anyway. So black now actually, Nimzovich commits with c5 here. He's not worried about dc. That would really fracture white's pawns, not only double pawns, an isolated pawn. And potential for d5 would be lost. So actually, Mattison actually plays g3, which again, the bishop's not completely effective on this fianchetto. It's not really doing much of a job for c4 later. So actually, Nimzovich times this nicely now, not to play the routine casting move, but to put his bishop in the fianchetto position on the queen side as well, simultaneously restraining again the c5 square, but also going to challenge for overprotection on e4. But also, if these bishops get exchanged here, white's king side is going to be slightly weakened as well. Not only that, c4 is going to be still an exploitable target very soon. It's on a light square, there'll be one less light square defender, and maybe even cd might become possible later. But black has to be wary about opening up the position. This bishop, he wants to keep that under lock and key as previously mentioned. So bishop g2, bishop b7. So we have all the elements in symphony in this game actually. We've got overprotection of e4, we've got restraint on c5, we've got the bishops. We're trying to use this positional sacrifice with maximum effect to close out the white's bishop pair. Now Nimzovich decides to castle. Sorry, his opponent Mattison castles, both sides castle, and now white plays just knight h4. Okay, so knight h4, the knight hasn't really got any ambition of f5. f5's covered. Nimzovich doesn't have to play e5 later, so this knight is hard to justify on the rim for the moment. In fact, Nimzovich, he takes on g2, and the knight actually doesn't recapture, the king recaptures, which looks a bit strange, because the knight recapturing, you could go backwards, go forward later, maybe later to e3, but actually the king captured, which gives an interesting tempo to Nimzo, this queen check, again overprotecting the critical e4 square. But also, it can switch to this sensitive c4 pawn, and that is also a tactical vulnerability as well. So this isn't looking good for white in this position. If we take stock at this position, look at the blockade. White's lost the bishop pair. These knights, the scene is set for them to be quite menacing already. If we look at this position with this blockade, it looks like an effective blockade. You get many Nimzo games where sometimes you think, well, white can blast through, there's pawn breaks. Are there any pawn breaks in this position for white? It's difficult to say. D takes c just looks so ineffectual here, with the bishop stuck on a3. If the bishop was anywhere else, maybe on g5 it would threaten bishop f6, but it's in such a hopeless square at the moment. Not only a hopeless square from the point of view of this diagonal, but also a tempo gaining square for black to use with queen a6. So actually queen a6 is played here, and this ties white's queen and commits white's queen to an exchange he really didn't want and an endgame he really didn't want, and this bishop is just hopeless within this pawn structure at the moment. So queen b3, avoiding the loss of a pawn. If the bishop went back, then queen takes c4 was quite safe. Pardon me, queen takes c4. Okay, so queen b3 is committed. Now these nasty knights are coming into play. Black plays knight c6, and there's another threat of gaining with tempo, attacking the queen, and also this poor victim, this c4 pawn. So the restrained blockade strategy is working like a charm here. And white is going to be forced to play the uncomfortable queen b5 very soon. In fact, after this next move, if he doesn't want to lose a pawn now, after knight a5, his queen and pawn are forked. The only defensive move to exploit black's loose queen is to play queen b5 here. And it looks as though, okay, white solved this problem. He's undoubled his pawns. Is that the end of the story? No, it's the beginning of the story here. This is a translation of weaknesses from a more theoretical weakness of the double pawn complex into a completely concrete weakness, which the variations expose material gain by force from this position. because although white loses the double pawns, the knight coming to c4 now is absolutely positionally crushing. The bishop has to move. There's no way of protecting the bishop, so it moves to c1. But black is now able to exploit. Look, these rooks are not connected. The knight's dim on the rim, and this b5 pawn, unfortunately, can be targeted to break open the a file and forcibly start winning material. That poor a2 pawn is going to be vulnerable and exposed to attack. So from the double pawn complex, it seems we've got menacing knights spring up on that sensitive c4 square. This knight's just nowhere to be able to challenge this knight at the moment. It will take like 2 moves to get back. It will take a long time to get back. So in the meantime, this knight's playing a pivotal role in protecting b6, which means a6 is even more effective. White's usual counterplay, maybe along the semi-open b file, is just hopeless here after this a6 move. So it's all in black's favour by playing a6, just exposing a2, and at luxury now black can just double up rooks against this poor a2 pawn. We could say that white's game so far in terms of counterplay has been completely, dead. No counterplay. The environment for the knights has been created. That imbalance, that positional sacrifice bishop takes c3 has been classically illustrated in this game, and white's done basically all the wrong things. This bishop exchange, c4 becoming extremely weak, the hopeless bishop on a3, these are all, unfortunately, in relation to that c4 weakness, not helping the cause. In fact, an object of tempo gain most of the time in this game. Now white decides to try and open up the position, but d6 is also protected by that useful knight on c4. It's doing a useful job on both these semi-open files. So d takes c5. So Nimzovich is under no obligation to play d takes c5 with the knight protecting d6. He plays b takes c5. And now this stumbling knight on the side tries to re-centralise. So it's another move for Nimzovich. Another move which he uses to attack another vulnerable pawn. At luxury he could also attack a2 with just doubling up rooks, but he plays instead another powerful knight centralising move, knight d5. So these knights provide a powerful aesthetic effect. So knight takes c3 is obviously a major threat, but rook a8. So what is white doing here? Well, he doesn't want to lose c3 in particular, so he just protects c3. Okay, there's if he plays bishop d2, I mean, if black wants now, he could just double up rooks and win a2. That's a simple method. And there may be other methods of winning this position. It just seems positionally quite impressive. Or maybe black can even consider just f5 to stop e4s, just to try and keep the knights in the centre. But then maybe f3. But here actually, just the simple move is played rook f8, just targeting the poor a2 pawn. So these two pawns just totally under fire after white seemingly solved one of his problems, the double pawns. That weakness was translated into these exploitable weaknesses, basically c3 and a2, and it's that transition which I find quite fascinating in chess, that sometimes the theoretical weaknesses, they're difficult to attack, but if you can swap the opponent's theoretical weaknesses for exploitable weaknesses, then you're halfway towards winning the game. And Nimzovich is more than halfway towards winning this game. In fact, after e4, Nimzovich simply plays a move which forcibly wins material, knight e5, and white actually had enough here. He resigned. Let's have a look. So the rook's attacked after that last move. f3 is also weaker. So if, say, rook d2, there's knight f3 check, winning the exchange. If the rook moves back, then again, white's losing two pawns at the very least. Well, there's knight takes c3. The rook's also protecting d6, so there's no rook d6s. So 2 pawns at least, and maybe just rook takes a2 is enough here to win. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope there's some insights there for Nimzovich's my system on why it's powerful, because there's elements of restraints, blockade, overprotection, minimizing counterplay, essentially giving the opponent a strategically lost position. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.